Let's make one of these into one of these. Hello, I'm Marcel.
And I'm Mrs. Snakeworks. First up, we need a box. Using Andy, the knife, Marcel then cut the tabs off the box. Using a straight edge helps. Luckily it's a square box and not a heart-shaped box. That's a Nirvana song for all you youngsters out there.
Hey, wait, now I used to absolutely love Nirvana as a teenager. I feel I need to go and give them a little listening to now. Okay, so next up we marked out a 1-inch-ish grid on two sides of the box. First up, the vertical. And then we joined those marks up. We then joined up the horizontal marks, giving us a grid. Now we can race on it with our light cycles. I do enjoy the original Tron movie. I also like the sequel, I think it was called Tron Legacy. Hopefully one day we'll get another, but I don't think a lot of people liked them, did they? So they probably won't make one.
The grid wasn't perfect as the lengths didn't divide exactly into inches, but that's fine. Just work your way into the middle and have the odd size grid section there.
I put the odd one in the middle. I thought it would look better there as opposed to on one side, therefore making it a bit asymmetrical. The next thing we did was mark out the windows. I made them all 2 squares tall on the grid. And then, using Andy the knife, remember him, I cut all the windows out. That left us with this, a lovely looking building. The sort of building a corrupt OCP executive might fall out of. I love me a bit of RoboCop.
We then repeat the process on the other side. Remember, we are only doing this to 2 sides. With the windows on both sides cut out, we have this.
I mean, you could put the windows on all of the sides. Maybe we'll do that next time. So this week, I have been mostly watching Orions Belt Minis. She's done a wonderful yellow painting guide that I wish I had watched before I painted my Yellow Knight. Oh well. Go and have a look for yourself when you get a moment.
I used to hate Lisa shading so much, and now something about it just makes the whole thing pop. It's so satisfying.
So next we cut the bottom in half and then cut down the sides so we can remove the 2 windowed faces. That left us with this. Our ruins are almost built already. You can see here we have an L-shaped ruined building skeleton to add to. Again, like I said before, there's nothing preventing you using more of the building sides. Now you don't have to follow my instructions to the letter. Feel free to experiment as you will, or just ignore my instructions entirely. It's your hobby, you do what you want to do.
Next up, we need some more card. Marcel's using the flaps he cut off earlier. My husband is very clever. I'm really proud of him. We are going to use them to make floors for the building. 2 tabs in an L shape will make 1 floor. You will then need 4 tabs to make 2 floors. Marcel placed them in the bottom of the ruins and marked out where he wanted to cut them. He decided to make the top floor thinner than the first.
Again, you can make your floor sections any shape and size that you want. The world is your oyster. This is an oyster apparently. Looks more like a castanet. Is that how castanets are made, from dead oysters? What does that even mean anyway, the world is your oyster? The world is your bivalve. Oh, my eyes have gone funny. I then cut those floors out along the lines we marked out. We need an adhesive next, so I'm using this PVA. It's almost empty and it needs replacing. Using the PVA glue, I then glue the floor sections together. Then I put a book on them to hold them together while they dried. You don't have to use a book. You could use a brick or anything else you like that's pretty heavy. This sellotape dispenser is quite weighty. I like to use it for weighing things down a lot.
Next, we are going to squirt a line of pea glue in between the windows where we want the floor to go.
PVA!
You need to check this before I record. Next, we are going to squirt a line of PVA glue in between
PVA.
I said that! Next, we are going to squirt a line of PVA glue in between the windows where we want the floor to go. We then push the floor into position and give it a wiggle around in that PVA to make sure it gets a good bond. There we go, the floor is in. Be careful with it now until it dries, else it might end up in the wrong place.
If the floor fell out, or ended up being glued in the wrong position, then your building would be ruined. I'll get my coat. Actually, being a ruin, it might work out okay, because it's a ruin. I'll put my coat back. Maybe allow mistakes to happen. I don't know. Next, we shall squeeze another line of PVA glue into the ruins for the next floor. The PVA is nearly empty now. And then, like before, we push the floor into position. I've put the smaller floor at the top of the ruins, so that way you can see the floor below from the top, if that makes sense. Again, if you want a bigger one up top, then you do you.
Now, at the moment, the bottom of the ruins is a straight edge, so let's make it a little more organic. First up, draw a wiggly line and then cut it off. That leaves us with this. That's a little more in keeping with the rest of the build now.
Now, I made a mistake here, and I noticed I should have cut that floor out before we glued all the other floors in. It would have been a lot easier going forward. Next up, you need a couple of big flat bits of cardboard. The easiest way to do this is get a big empty box. I'm using this one from Snakeworks Junior's potty. Apparently it's my size, not your size. I then cut out the two big flat panels from the box. Feel free to throw the rest in the recycling, or even keep it for another project down the line. Now, I used to keep all my spare cardboard boxes and things, but they just kept piling up. I save only the best boxes nowadays.
Okay, next up, place your ruins on that flat card and draw around it. This is going to be the base. Try to leave around an inch flange.
Flange.
Although in hindsight, Marcel said he would probably recommend halving this.
Yeah, I think the flange was probably a little too big.
With your base marked out, we can then cut it out. You can use whatever you like to cut it out. Marcel used scissors. Here's the important bit. Lay your base back on the card, but so the grain of the cardboard runs perpendicular to the first base sheet. Then, draw around your base again, leaving another little flange. Again, Marcel says this one was too big.
Now, I do think that my flange was too big here. I ended up flapping around just a bit too much. When you make yours, I recommend creating a smaller one. Like before, we then cut the base out. Again, I'm using my scissors that I stole from Mrs. Snakeworks a few years back. She still hasn't noticed. Next, using the remnants of my PVA, I then squirt this onto the lower base section. I tried not to be too sparing, but it was about to run out. We then stick our upper base onto the lower base. I didn't show it here, but again I put a heavy object on top to hold it down while it dried. Again, it was a book. The perpendicular card will or should prevent the cardboard from warping. It warps because it gets damp from all the water and moisture from all the painting and washes and things we put on. Well, it should hopefully prevent this anyway.
Next, we place our ruins onto the base and do our best to centralise them. Then, when you're happy with the positioning, draw around them. Next up, some more PVA glue. Surely this one's run out by now. We then squirt a load all over the bottom of the ruins.
With the glue applied, we can now stick the ruins to the base. I would suggest putting something heavy on it here to make sure it dries nice and flat. Also, make sure it's all dry before moving on so you don't damage it. So, I did happen to notice that the top of my ruins were too tidy, so I then marked off where I wanted to cut them down a bit to add to the ruined effect. I then took my scissors and gave the ruins a little haircut. It's now more in keeping with the ruined look. Now, watching this footage back, I'm sure it would have made more sense to give the ruins its haircut way before now. Probably before the floors went in, but we know for next time, right?
The glues finally ran out, so Marcel acquired a new bottle. This time it's called Cascares. We've not tried this brand before, but hopefully it's okay. What Marcel then does is run a bead of PVA into all of the joins, then smooths them over with his finger to add some more strength. This stage is a little messy, so have some wipes or something on standby. With all those gaps filled and fingered, we have this. Now we just wait for it to dry.
Eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed the sellotape in there, in that footage. That's because I didn't want to wait for things to dry before moving on. We call that one impatience. I had a lot to do, you know? I would always recommend waiting. To help prevent warping while all that glue dries, I put a load of weights on the flanges of the base. I just used what I had to hand. A bunch of full spray cans and bottles. Bricks would have been ideal. After it's all dry, you can take them off. Sadly, I ripped a bit of the flange off as the weights stuck to it. No dear. Now, always try to be careful you don't tear your flange. To prevent your flange sticking and tearing, move the weights around while they dry. Did someone just drive past? How dare they interrupt the shot? Anyway, that way that'll prevent them from getting stuck in one place at the end when you pull them off.
Right then. Next up, we have some ingredients to cook a texture base. Next up, we have some ingredients to cook a texture paste. We use PVA glue, black paint, flour, and a little salt to prevent it going mouldy in future. We then mix all the ingredients together in a tub. Just add enough flour to give the paint a texture. Oh, also add some water too. You can see here we have far too much flour, so Marcel added more paint and water. Yeah! Here we go! A perfect paste consistency. There's some lumps in there too, a bit like Marcel's mum's gravy. Don't worry about those. Then using a big crap brush, give the whole thing a coating of the texture paste. Try to work it into all those gaps too. Here's what it looks like with that texture paint applied. A mess. Perfect for the random texture we want.
Now, for some reason, my texture paint didn't cover very well. I don't think I used enough paint. Another lesson learnt for next time. Next up, we apply a layer of glue to the flange. Spread it around using an old brush. It doesn't matter if you use too much, but too little might leave bare patches. Then, using an application implement, I'm using an old spoon, tip some grit onto the gluey flange. It's a bit like making glittery Christmas cards at school back in the 80s. Then, when all your flanges are covered in grit, tip off the excess. I've done this on an old bin liner to prevent it going everywhere. Now, I forgot to mention that when you're basing big bits of scenery and using large amounts of grit, always try to put a protective sheet or layer down on your work area. It saves a lot of annoying cleanup later on.
Okay, time to make a mix of PVA. If Marcel can actually get any out of the rest of the bottle. And some water, and then we give it a good mixing. It's ready when it's the consistency of milk. If you make it too thin, just add more glue. If it's too thick, more water. Then using an old crap brush, apply this mixture to all of the grit on the flange. When it dries, it will seal that grit in a little more. Don't be too rough here, or you can actually rub the grit off and you'll have to repeat the previous steps. Nobody wants to be doing that. Now, as the flange is about to be wet again, we need to apply those weights while it dries to prevent warping.
Now, when we make the Mark II version of these ruins, I'm going to make it so we don't have to worry about all these warping scenarios. I think that's the main problem of these ruins. I've left the grit to dry overnight, and now we have a nice solid sealed flange. We can now begin painting. To begin with, I'm using some matte black spray. This was about £6 from the range, but I think you can get even cheaper stuff in Poundland or QD. Look at that arty shot with the leaves flying by in the wind. Ignore the hand. I then gave the entire ruins a coat of the matte black spray. Of course, as I wanted to prime outside, the weather decided to be windy. Every bloody time. Now, I swear the clouds and the weather wait for me to want to prime something. And then they see me leave the house with the primer and they're like, ooh, give him a good blowing.
When all the matte black is dry, we now have an undercoated ruin to begin painting. I do apologise for the bouncing of the camera. Marcel couldn't stop flicking the edges and tapping the floors. Terrible behaviour. First up, it's Vallejo Light Grey. Using the biggest dry brush we had, Marcel then gave the entirety of the ruins a dry brush with the light grey. It doesn't matter if you go too heavy here, as later steps will tie it all together. Here's what it looks like after that light grey coat. It's starting to look more like concrete now.
Now you might get away with just priming in grey to get to this stage. Maybe we'll try that next time on the Mark II ruins. I keep calling them Rowins. Can't say ruins very well. Ruins, Rowins. It's one of those little tongue twisters, you know. Next up, it's Vallejo model colour white. Using that big brush again, I then give the ruins a dry brushing with the white. I tried my best to apply it a little lighter than the previous layer to allow some grey to show through. Again, it doesn't matter if you go too heavy, as the next steps will tie it all together. And here we are. The white dry brush has been applied, leaving us with this. I think it's looking great so far. I mean, technically, you could leave it there, and it would be fine to use. But I'm going to add just a couple more steps.
Next up, Marcel made a wash out of black paint, water, PVA glue and matte medium. We will show you how to make it in greater detail in a separate video. We then slather that wash all over the ruins. You can go as light or heavy as you like. We went quite heavy as I wanted a darker look. With the wash applied, it looks like a wet multi-storey car park. Now we just have to wait for it to dry again. Let's hope it doesn't warp.
Now I have to admit it took a long time to dry here. And I was about to say the weather has really turned cold, which is probably the reason why, but it's now sunny and stuff again in, what, October? Mid-October? Where's the winter? I'm fed up with this hot weather. Makes me sweat. Sweat like that In Excess song. Now, if it was the summer, or the weather was like this, it would have dried a lot quicker. But I like to wait overnight anyway, just to be on the safe side. And as Hicks would say, it's the only way to be sure. I think Ripley said it too, actually. Now, if you want to come to chat with us about the weather, or Hicks, or Ripley, or anything hobby related, or movie related, then come and join our friendly Discord server that's not hidden behind a paywall. The link to which is in the description below, or up here somewhere. We return now to the Vallejo model colour white. Again, using that big brush, I gave the ruins a final light dry brushing all over with the white.
Now while we put our paints away, I just want to take a moment to thank all of our patrons and channel members. Dan Yallop, Lee Blackley, Donald, Pine Tree, Upzilla, Charles Marlowe, Andrew Marrington, Dr. Lee. Thank you all so much for your support and we love you all.
We do indeed. Now, a few of you might recognise Andy the Knife. He's been a staple of the channel for a long time. He really cuts through on things. I'll get my coat. Anyway, interestingly with Andy the Knife, if you look on the back, it says, if you're enjoying this video, then please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. That means you, Andy. If you are enjoying the content on the channel, then please consider joining us on Patreon, the link to which is in the description below, or up here somewhere. And here it is, the finished ruins. Possibly the easiest piece of scenery that I've ever made. I think it looks great, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out.
It would be super simple to make a few of these over the course of a weekend and fill up a whole 6x4 table for your games of Warhammer 40k or whatever other game you fancy.
A couple of mistakes were made along the way, but we've learnt a lot for the future Mark II version. I really can't wait to use these in a game, you know. If you want to see some more scenery tutorials, then check out the playlist up here somewhere. And as always, thank you very much for watching.